Phyllis, can we go back to, is it the year 2000, when you first were approached about adapting Patricia Highsmith's book, The Price of Salt? Was it 2000?
I was actually approached in 1997.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So it's longer than even we thought. But I've managed to track down the dates now. And so I finished that adaptation probably mid-1997, the first draft.
Wow, okay. The world was a completely different place at that time. So many different things. I know you waited a very long time to finish or even get to the idea of finishing the film. Why did you hang on so long?
Well, I felt a particular attachment to this project because, for one thing, it was the first script that I was actually hired to write. And over the years had formed quite a bond with Tessa Ross from Film 4, who financed the development of this, and with the various producers who were attached at various stages. And I'd known Patricia Highsmith. She was a friend of mine over the last decade of her life. So there was a personal, emotional investment in this. In only the way that your first film or your first love has that, you know. I think if I'd done it now and we'd waited all those years, I might feel differently. But it will always have a very special place in my emotional life, this film.
I understand from something else I read about you that it was almost at some point you were so tired of waiting for it to happen that you felt sick, or you really needed to just move on in life. Can you talk about where you were at that time? What year was this?
Yeah, this right around, I think it was around 2010, the rights to the book lapsed. And so the project I thought was gone, was dead. My script was useless without a producer who owned the rights to the book. And I did move on. And it was about a year later that I got a call from Elizabeth Carlson, who is one of the producers of Carol, and with whom I'd worked before on a movie called Mrs. Harris for HBO that I wrote and directed. And also Christine Vachon produced that with Liz. And she said, you know, I've got the rights to the book. Let's make a movie. And I said, no, thank you. There's too much water under the bridge. It's too painful, too many false starts and stops, and I'm tired of it. Go find some nice, young, unsuspecting, fresh writer to give you a new take on it. And she wouldn't let it go. She and Tessa Ross, it took them a year to convince me to give it another go. And at this point, of course, I'm over the moon that they did. But yeah, it was frightening to me, the thought of stepping back into the breach. Not only because it had been a long and painful process, and sometimes quite joyous, but you know, at the end of the day it wasn't made, so painful. But I was also a very different writer at that point in my life. And I had a concern that I would not be able to step back into the very particular point of view that comes from being a young writer who has a take and a point of view on a piece of material that was absolutely crucial to its success if it was going to be made. That optimism, that hope, that all of those things that inform what's at the core of Carol. But once I came back on, I thought, oh, why was I afraid? Of course it's easy. You know this material so well by now that if someone had asked me to set it in a circus, you know, with performing elephants as Carol and Therese, I could have done it, you know, and it would have been moving. But to get me back to that, yes, frankly, it took a lot.
Can you talk about the process of adapting a novel into a screenplay, the actual physical process, like how you began it. You sit at your computer, and where do you begin?
Right. Well, that's never changed. The same thing that happened with Carol has happened with all subsequent projects. I read the novel obsessively, maybe 4, 5, 6 times, just quickly. Make a bunch of notes that I then never ever refer to ever again. I just write things down. It's a bit like rote memorization, maybe, that you take this stuff in, maybe by osmosis. And then I go away and I do something else. I'll go to a bunch of baseball games, or I'll watch TV, or I'll go to Vegas, something, for a few weeks. And then I come back, and if I've got, say, 10 weeks to do something, I'll use 8 of them in other ways. I won't even think about it. And then I'll sit down and I'll write from page 1 to the end, very quickly. And without stopping, without revising, and without shuffling scenes around. There's something about a structure, for me, arriving at how something begins and ends provides a structural tool. And that's really the way music mostly is composed. So I look at it that way. And then the revision is always the same. If something is wrong on page 46, the previous 45 pages also have to be adjusted, and all the pages that follow. Because one thing is off, it sets something off in another section. I've never been someone who's learned how to do that thing that I always see with famous screenwriters, the cards, the ability to take one scene here and put it here, and it always seems that's not my process. It's got to all work as a piece in one long act almost.
How are you writing in some of the subtext? So much of the movie, there are things implied, nothing's really said, but the audience gets a general feeling. They know how these characters either feel about each other or where things are going. How are you writing that in?
Well, subtext generated in probably 2 ways. One is if the topic of your scene is, why are you cheating on me? As it sometimes is, say, with Harj and Carol. You have them talk about anything but that in a way and in a context. So Harj and Carol talking about their marriage whilst Therese is in the other room and overhearing things. You do it in that way. You go off point of a conversation. You have a conversation about how difficult it is to repair the damn plumbing or whatever. And you do that in order to make your point very clear, which is, damn it, this is wrong. All of this is wrong. And the other way, which is really one of my favorite ways, is to just describe behavior in a certain context. So Carol and Therese riding in a car. What is she looking at? What is she doing? What is this? What's actually going on? And none of it has anything to do with, I don't know, camera angles or anything like that. It's just about what's happening, which is the basis of all drama, whether it's a screenplay or a play. How people inhabit a space at a certain time. That's it. It seems almost laughably simple or easy, but it rarely makes it intact to a screen in the way that this has, enhanced greatly by the mise en scène and the performances, and everybody in every department just working to preserve a fundamental truth about a piece of material.
Your first draft, how much weight do you let it carry? And then how much time, you talked about giving time and space to actually reading the story, doing other things, trying to forget about it, and then coming back. What about with the first draft?
In what do you mean? Do I let it sit for a while, or
how much weight do you actually? How much do you really obsess over it, or you just, you know, they call it the vomit draft, and you kind of
Yeah,
get it
no,
out?
I'm not a vomiter.
Okay.
And mostly I think that when scripts are not right fundamentally in their first drafts, they never will be. Hence 4, 5, 6 writers being called onto something in service of something that wasn't right to begin with. So you should get a new take rather than try to put a Band-Aid on something that doesn't work. I wish more weight and more time were given to first drafts, because they are often the draft that's closest to something electric, whether you're writing a thriller or a quiet little movie or a comedy. And subsequent drafts, and however long someone works on something, in the end, it always ends up going back to an earlier state. When you've got the right people working on something, it's always, in my experience, goes back to its first fundamental state with improvements.
Of any of the scripts you've written that maybe you haven't put out into the world, what do you feel were the mistakes, the initial mistakes? And how did you then go back and make sure that never happened again?
Well, I mean, since I'm not really that writer, I'm too OCD to let anything awful get out in the world. I'm not so sure I've made mistakes, but what I think does happen a fair amount is that you're asked to do something that you're fundamentally wrong for. And so whatever it is you put out there, it could be the best thing you've ever written. It's not going to be right for the people who wanted some other fundamentally different take. So I think what I've learned is to say no to things that I know in my heart that I'm not good for, or believe me, you don't want me. You know, which is always a shock for people, because writers, the cliche of writers is that they're needy and they're worried always about their next job. And I'm almost that person who would rather not have the job than do a bad job for someone. Not for me, because I can always find an interesting take on something. But if I know a piece of source material, and I will only do adaptations for other people, I will not write original scripts to give to other people, because the emotional investment's different generally. I just say no. And it's the best thing a screenwriter can learn to do. Well, to preserve their own sanity, and also to make sure they do get other jobs, because then there's not a bunch of people out there going, oh, that was awful.